I wish that like introverts could have like medic alert bracelets where you could just like identify each other at a party and be like, do you just want to sit here and be quiet for a minute? You know what I mean? I think it would be such a public service.
Aparna, that's your merch for the
That's my merch.
That's
totally
my next move.
And welcome back. You're listening to Hysteria, the podcast for people who have at some point or another Googled whether or not they make those "Don't Pet Me, I'm Working" vests for dogs in people sizes. Our guest today is a comedian, writer, and actor. She's written for Late Night, performed on Comedy Central, and you've heard her voice on BoJack Horseman. And I recently discovered Frog and Toad. It was a very pleasant surprise. I was watching it with my daughter, and I was like, hey, I know her. Most recently, she wrote a book called Unreliable Narrator, Me, Myself, and Imposter Syndrome. And she has a new audiobook called The Introverts Survival Guide, out now on Audible. Aparna Nancherla, welcome to Hysteria.
Thank you for having me.
We are so excited to have you. So first of all, let's start with talking about being an introvert. So What's an introvert? And why were so many online quizzes telling everybody that they were one back in 2015?
Okay, so I thought I knew what one was, but I feel like I also got swept up in the personality quiz craze of the aughts. But yes, so an introvert is still someone who, because I think we think of extroverts as, outgoing, life of the party, always needing to be around people. And it's not that introverts don't need to be around people. They just get their social connection in different ways. Like they sort of value, one-on-one conversations with like a few trusted people versus, a big party or like a big mingler. And they also can enjoy situations like that, but then they'll just need more recharge time on the back end versus extroverts who are actually getting their fuel from being around other people, where their alone time is more them like, I don't know, the opposite of introverts at a party, like them practicing being alone.
So when did you first realize that being around other people drained your life force?
I think it was early on. I don't think I had a word for introvert, but I was also a shy kid. And I think shyness and introversion aren't the same thing. So I think for me, it was kind of conflated because I was also just very scared of talking to other people, whether it was from social energy or not. It was also just like another barrier that made it hard to connect with others.
Do you think that introverts are at a disadvantage when it comes to the way that society is set up? And how have you found, can you as an introvert and can other introverts in general kind of overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say America is a pretty extrovert, skewed place in that we really value magnetism and charisma and people who really can keep other people's attention in a sort of rapt, charming manner. And I don't know. For me, it's kind of funny because I think I was reading some of Susan Cain's work. She wrote this book, Quiet, that was kind of a known tome in the introvert canon. And she was saying that sort of historically we used to kind of value like introversion and like quiet stoicism. And like, I think maybe Abraham Lincoln was like an early, figurehead of just like the model of just someone who's like quiet, calm, collected, reserved maybe, but then they really like know what they're doing, or they're like really a person of conviction. And then I think weirdly enough with just like, I don't know, the rise of the American dream and like this idea that you could like make something of yourself, like we started valuing this like kind of outward magnetism, charisma, like the cult of personality. So it was almost like it is a social construct in a way, just like the way we worship extroversion now. But to that point, I do think now there is just more literature, on introverts versus extroverts and just ways to make an environment welcoming to both. But I still think to that point, like the pendulum still swings more towards extroverts overall, especially like in the workplace and stuff where it's like, if you're in a meeting, it's like the person who's speaking the most or something is still going to maybe hold the floor more than someone who later comes up and is like, actually, I had 5 ideas I thought of quietly.
I find it, as you were talking about that, I was thinking, you're totally right about the US being a country that values extroversion, but it also feels like at the same time, we're not really creating spaces that encourage extroversion or that like give extroverts a real public space to recharge. Like, I don't know, there aren't very many third spaces anymore, like parks or community centers or places where people can all go and hang out. So it's really interesting to kind of see that tension play out, how like on one hand, we're told be an extrovert and that's how you succeed. But on the other hand, it's like the only way for extroverts to like sharpen their tools or to feel recharged is to like go to places where it costs money to go. And then meanwhile, introverts are sort of like don't have anywhere to like go. I don't know.
Yeah, it's also, I think it's interesting too with like the internet where I feel like a lot of people now use that as a, further means of expressing themselves or their personality. It's funny because as an introvert, I find the internet in at least early on when I was on social media, I found it really helpful because it felt like a way to express myself without having to kind of compete with attention in the same way of being necessarily the loudest one. Like you're just kind of putting out your work online. You can kind of be loud in your own way where you're just like the work can speak for itself in a different way than necessarily having to carry it with my personality in a room. But to that degree, I wonder, I'm curious because I'm not sure if you guys consider yourself extroverts or introverts, but like I'm curious whether you find the internet like fueling, like if you are an extrovert or on the flip side, if you are an introvert, like how it manifests in terms of your social energy.
Yeah. Alyssa, are you an introvert or an extrovert? I bet the answer will surprise some people.
Oh, I'm an introvert.
Yeah?
I'm an introvert who copes by acting extroverted.
Sure.
I think that's the best way to put it. Like for me to go to a party full of people I don't know, my social battery goes down to about 10% pretty fast. Like it really, I get really anxious about it. It's a strange thing. And like people who spend a lot of time with me up here, it's almost like a little bit of a joke now. Like, Alyssa, we're inviting people you don't know. And I'm like, it's okay. Just like tell me a little bit about them so I can like get it together. But it's funny because if my parents ever listened to this, I was the one who always talked at the dinner table. I was, always got in trouble for talking too much in school. But I think it's like how I dealt with feeling uncomfortable sometimes.
How about Aparna's question about the internet? Like, do you think that have you found that it enables you to express yourself without draining your battery or the opposite? No?
I find it's the opposite. It makes me much more stressed. Like I find the internet and social media like quite stressful. And like, I think of course, this may be a difference between like anxiety and introversion, but like that I just, this is, that I think that people, in so many ways, social media has just become the Wild West. It just feels like an unsafe place in general. But I'd say years ago when Twitter was still decent, I did enjoy Twitter and I never felt fueled by it, but I don't find it as emotionally exhausting as I do now.
Yeah, I think exactly the same for me. Like nowadays, I can barely tolerate any time on the platforms because it is just so much noise and it's anxiety and just like my introversion, like fear of like just upsetting other people or just like, I don't know, like just kind of engaging in the wrong way. I don't know. I get like very nervous about it. But I feel like early on, maybe it just like the novelty of it or just being like, oh, this is a way to put myself out there that isn't quite as draining as some other environments. Like, even just trying to be funny in the green room with other comedians where you're like, oh, nobody heard my joke, but I thought it was pretty good.
I feel like, Aparna, the internet now social media at least, can be sort of summarized as you go on to say you love mangoes and everyone yells at you and is like, why do you hate oranges? And it's like, what? That's not, but I feel like that's it in some.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. It's a bad faith machine for sure.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I think that if you're somebody, believe it or not, most people who don't know me well do not believe this, but I am also an introvert. But I'm an iPhone 8 with the newest OS that is deliberately draining. Like when I'm in social situations, I like heat up and like overcompensate.
Yes, definitely.
Because I'm like, everybody's good. People are going to think I'm being snotty, or people are going to think I'm being mean, or I'm not interested, or somehow I'm failing to keep this social interaction going. Because I think as women, sometimes we're raised to feel like we need to be the host of the conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Like we're responsible for everyone, like asking the questions and keeping things going. And like, I mean, men don't really have to, I mean, I'm generalizing, but I don't think that most men are raised that way to feel like if a social interaction is awkward, it's their fault. I tend to, I'm like an overheated iPhone, just my battery going from like 77 down to like 17. You want to go on low power mode within like an hour. And I need to be by myself for like long periods of time. Otherwise, I feel like I'm going to just start crying, like
totally.
I feel completely. And like, Aparna, I wanted to talk about like anxiety too, because you've talked a lot about it in your work. You've written about it. You've performed jokes around it. And like, it seems like being an introvert and having anxiety and introversion are like real good pals. How do they interact for you?
For me, I mean, I think introverts are also geared in a way where we process things very internally and like kind of live very much in our own heads. And I think for me, anxiety is very much the same way, where I'm like, living out a million realities in my head that may or may not be occurring in actuality. Like, I think I remember someone saying like with anxiety, it's like you already have imagined the worst thing happening. And it's like your brain kind of almost can't distinguish between the fact that it hasn't happened. Like it might as well have happened in your head. Because you've already like gone through the full gamut of emotions of processing that fear. But yeah, I think for me, it's like I think what makes it tricky is sometimes I have to be like, am I, not going to this party because I'm really anxious and I need like a recharge day as an introvert? Or is it just me, not wanting to engage with the world at all? And like, it's tricky to sometimes know the line between self-care and, like expressing your true self or something.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Alyssa, do you ever feel like you need to answer the same question for yourself? Like, am I not going to this because I'm being a poop? Or am I not going to this because... Can you, like, do you remember a recent situation where that happened?
It is all the time. I have conversations with myself literally, I mean, almost, I'm not going to say every time I leave the house, but whenever I'm going into a social situation, 99% of the time, about 12 hours out, I'm like, why did I agree to this? What was I thinking? And then sometimes I'll be like, I'll sit and I'll break it down, because you also... You guys tell me if I'm wrong. You also don't want to stop getting invited to things, because that makes it worse. So you don't want to be like the person who always says no or says yes and then flakes. I hate to flake. That's another thing. It's like, I really try to, like, if I commit to doing something, I really want to see it through. Then you're like, maybe it'll rain and I can have an excuse. And it's like, no, Alyssa, you committed, so you're going to go. And the next time you go ahead and you commit again. But now a lot of times I'll be like, I'll talk to myself, be like, okay, like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to get tired. You're going to get exhausted by this. But like, everyone who's going to be here is nice. Why are you stressing? And I try to talk myself off the ledge a bit, be like, okay, girl, get up and get out, kind of thing. But then there are some times when I'm like, if I think no one's going to miss me, like if it's a really big event and it feels over the top, and I'm like, no one's going to fucking know if I was there or not, I will give myself permission those times and be like, I'm not going.
Yeah, I feel like for me, the hardest bar is like getting myself out the door. And then a lot of times it'll be like fine when I get there, or, like you said, Alyssa, like I'll, do my hour of like 9 conversations, and then I'll be like, okay, I clocked in and I can clock out.
I made an appearance.
yeah.
I hit my minimum.
But I have had, I think the worst one time I agreed to go to like a comedian's birthday party, and I got there and the bar was just like so loud and there was like people spilling out of it. And I was like, absolutely not. I just didn't even go inside. I just like turned around and went home.
Oh my God, Aparna, that just gave me such a visceral flashback to going to comedians' birthday parties. Whenever there's any party full of people who perform or communicate for a living is like extra draining. Draining. Even though I'm somebody who performs and communicates for a living, do you feel like competitive when you go there? Do you feel like, or do you just feel like yourself getting smaller? Like, how do you feel? When you go to those
I don't feel competitive with others because sometimes I just feel like I cannot compete with, the sheer star power of your charisma. Like, I'm not even going to try, but it is like, I think it's draining too. Cause it's like sometimes when people do feel the need to like perform that much, they also kind of require you to engage a certain way. And sometimes I don't even feel capable of doing that, of just like being this like acolyte or something to their personality.
I wish that like introverts could have like medic alert bracelets where you could just like identify each other at a party and be like, do you just want to sit here and be quiet for a minute? You know what I mean? I think it would be such a public service.
Aparna, that's your merch for the
That's my merch.
That's
my
like
next move. I'm like on Shark Tank and they're just like, what are you talking about?
Oh my God, please go on. I could picture it. It would be so
sit
great.
there, make them so uncomfortable with your silence and just be like, here.
Well, so here it is.
And then just totally like the anti-pitch. Yeah.
I mean, anti-comedy is a thing. Why not the anti-pitch?
Yes.
I went to a party one time, Aparna, for it was a comedian's New Year's Eve party.
Oh,
and there was a point in the night where there were a lot of stand-up comedians there. Yeah. And there was a point in the night where they set up a stage and people were doing sets.
No.
I know. And I was just like, they were doing like tight fives of deliberately bad jokes that were sort of like in jokes that they picked up. I think, like if you go to too many open mics and you just eventually people just start making jokes about what happens at an open mic.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was like, oh my God, I had a flashback to that party and I just remember by the end of the night, I was like, I don't ever want to talk to a human being ever again.
But the funny thing is, like, I am like repelled by that whole idea, like that. I was just like, why would you do that? But then, there are a lot of comedians who would be into that or would be like eager to jump on that soapbox for however many minutes. And I think even some of those people would be introverts. So I think that always throws me off where I'm just like, how are you an introvert? But I think it's what you guys are both saying, where it's like a lot of introverts develop sort of an extrovert persona to manage the world. And sometimes it is like, does seem like there's no way this person is an introvert, but it's just because they're like performing extra hard to seem not like one.
Right. It's like somebody who exercises with the wrong form, where it's like,
yes, not engaging your core, but just crashing through those sit-ups.
You're doing the exercises, but you're going to hurt your neck.
Totally.
Aparna, is there anything about being an introvert that, like, as you've thought more about it, you've realized you kind of were in denial about and you were trying to work against, but you've started to understand that you can work with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of what we're saying, where I think early on in comedy, I really thought I had to be like at every social event and like sort of just hanging out as much as the next person. But I feel like, especially with age, I've just like learned I have a certain capacity for those situations. And it's like, sometimes I do still beat myself up about like, oh, why didn't you stay for like the after party or something? But now I'll kind of meet myself halfway, where it'll be like, okay, like I'll put in an appearance, but then that is enough. Like I don't have to like stay the whole time or like, necessarily talk to every person I'm scared of in the room. I'll pick one and I'll do that. Like just like kind of giving myself more room to kind of show up as I am versus just always trying to be like, how can you change to be a better, like ideal version of what you think you should be?
One thing, going back to the online thing, one way that being online has not been good for me, as someone who has like introverted tendencies, is that I think that the online, you write something, you tweet something, and there it is. And it can be screenshotted and shared. And like, let's pretend there's an imaginary group chat of people who just like hate you and find you annoying, or me annoying. They could just like share it and pass it around, and there it is, like in stone, in screenshot. It's a JPEG. And when you have a conversation with somebody, if you say something that doesn't quite come out right, or that doesn't work, or you make an awkward comment, they can't like screenshot that and send that around to everybody. And I feel as though I feel like being online and spending as much time online as I have has made me sometimes think of every social interaction almost like something that I post or something that I tweet. Like that it's something like the stakes are really high, because if I mess up, somebody's going to pass it around and people will remember. And it's like, I don't know. Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I was just thinking in light of like the lockdown and the pandemic, how, I still have conversations with people where we're both like, I still don't feel like fully like I've regained the same social self I had before the pandemic, where I'm like having a conversation at a party and I'm totally like freeze of like knowing the next thing to say. Like, I don't know, there's some sort of stamina has still not been regained. And I do think of that same thing where I'm just like, are other people clocking this the same way as me? Are they having this same experience of feeling like a little bit less good at this than they used to be? I just feel more hyper aware of like social interaction in general. And I think, like you're saying, that is amplified too by living online.
Alyssa, explain your nodding and
oh
saying
God,
yes.
Like COVID was terrible for my sad little introverted tendencies, because it's like running a marathon. It's like any kind of exercise, right? Like you lose your muscle memory if you don't do it. And so like the first couple of times, I was like, I don't know if I should go to this. Has everyone tested? Like, are people going to wear masks? And the worst was those first events where people were wearing masks, because the act of trying to make conversation through the mask was actually physically exhausting. Like it was actually physically exhausting. And you're like, pussy, shouldn't have done that. Look how tired I am. I've got a headache now.
It was like trying to talk to people on speakerphone at a party where they are looking at you, because you can't see their face and you can't like read their lips if it's loud. And oh God, parties are the worst. Why are we having
but like at the same time, especially like I do think that I do much better in like, let's say like groups of 20, like a sit down dinner that's very civilized, and everyone, like one of my friends up here, one of my dearest friends, she has groups over for dinner, and I've met some of the greatest people through them, and I'm so glad that I went to them. But in general, if it's like over 50 people, there's like, I will pop in, I will have a drink, and I will leave. And that is where it ends. And that was probably where my heart was before COVID, but after COVID, it's just a rule.
Yeah. And that's the thing I've noticed, like, because everyone was like, oh, you must love this, like during lockdown. And I was like, no, I think that's the thing with introverts. They still need that social stimulation and like being around other people. It's just in different ways. Like even just getting to meet up with a friend in the park to have like a conversation, I would find so like helpful and rejuvenating. And I definitely was not thriving, like being alone by myself all the time.
I think even people who had partners weren't necessarily thriving, because you also like, you had like kind of the worst of both worlds, where you were like by yourself, but not by yourself.
Yeah.
And you never got to, you always were hanging around. I think it was rough on everybody. And yeah, that was a bad time. So Aparna, what are the key things an introvert needs to survive from your experience as an introvert?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of just like a space to recharge in whatever way you find that possible. Like for me, it's like sometimes it just is even like, if I'm out or I'm like at a meeting that's like killing me, it's just like going to the bathroom for a few minutes and being like alone with myself, and like being able to like take a few breaths, or just like like establish my like connection to myself, because I feel like I can get lost socially easily. But also just like having people who get you and like get your speed and like kind of just are okay with you, having these needs and maybe not being as socially available as the next person or in the same way. Yeah, I mean, to me, they're not huge things. They're just kind of like little shifts that allow for your battery to like regain, fuel that are maybe not built into society right now in the most like intuitive way.
Yeah, that sounds correct. You live in Los Angeles now, and you've lived in New York, and those are two places that present their own sets of challenges for people who need to recharge by themselves. So what would your advice be to people who live in places or in situations where it's kind of hard for them to steal time alone? What's your advice to someone like that to find space to recharge?
Yeah, I mean, I think either just being deliberate about making that space in your own life, whether that's like, going for walks or whatever it is, like any ritual you can like commit to or find that will help you create that boundary for creating that space for yourself. I think it's very hard if you, live in a very like social environment where it is like maybe a little more difficult to find that time or space for yourself. But I think just remembering to value that as like as important as like drinking enough water or like getting enough sleep, where it's like a small thing, but it actually makes a huge difference to like your ability to like live with a little more ease, I think.
For sure. Aparna Nancherla, thank you so much for joining us. This was a fun conversation. A lot of words for an introvert. Just kidding.
Yeah.
For 3 introverts.
I know. Well, see, my battery is going to be at about 15% by the end of this recording. I'm going to go
without question.
And lie down. Aparna's book, Unreliable Narrator, Me, Myself, and Imposter Syndrome, available wherever you get books. She also has a new audiobook, Introvert Survival Guide. You can find it now. Aparna, thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Aparna.
For having me. I must go recharge.